If you're a senior technical leader trying to move fast with AI, but every deployment feels like you risk you'll personally be blamed for, this episode's for you. The stakes are concrete: audit exposure, data leakage, delivery slowdown, and you becoming the approval layer again. We're going to break down how to build speed with safety without turning yourself into the control plane, plus what enterprises think they're ready for and where they're wrong, what breaks first in real AI rollouts, what's good enough governance, and what it looks like when you need decisions to move. Welcome to Gaining the Technology Leadership Edge. I'm Mike, and today we're talking to Santosh Kaveti, a former enterprise CTO who's lived inside regulated environments and is now responsible for scaling AI security and compliance at the same time as CEO of ProArch. This matters because most AI failures don't start with models, they start with leadership bottlenecks, unclear accountability, and performance that was built in a slower world. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mike. Good to be here.
Yeah, I appreciate having you. So, I don't want to start with your resume. I'd like to start with, the pressure when AI shows up. Leaders often become the last approval step again, especially in regulated environments. So could you take us to a moment when you first saw that tension show up operationally?
Oh, it shows up quite frequently. Um, as you rightly said, right? We've experienced this time and again, especially in the last 3 years, where most conversations are about AI and AI adoption. The technology is not the bottleneck. It's the organizational culture, especially the leadership and how they approach, how they think, how they lay out the framework. That's the bottleneck. Lately, there is actually enormous top-down push for organizations to adopt AI to become more efficient. Okay, now which is okay, but that's not supported, aligned, or enabled through proper mindset, culture, education, training, and framework. It's typically pushed down. It's typically fragmented. Again, siloed. AI is looked as novelty. There is typically an agenda, and not a clear vision on how AI can be leveraged, how AI can transform. People getting into the execution mode, sometimes feeling like they will miss the boat if they don't do something, now, without actually thinking through and say, what do I need, from organizational culture perspective, what do I need, governance perspective, what do I need, am I even ready to start AI journey? The preparedness is such a big deal, and I've seen organizations simply just get into the execution mode and fail miserably. I can go on and give you several examples, but this has been the common theme across our experiences last 3 years, quite frankly.
Yeah, I keep seeing, people talk about AI readiness and they frame it as like tooling. But the first crack is usually decision design. Who can ship, who can approve, who absorbs the blame when it goes wrong. And, a lot of times that's because the CTO has all the decision-making power. Every decision has to go through them. So when you were operating as a CTO in regulated environments, what was the first place the speed versus safety tension showed up in a way leaders could not ignore?
Oh, well, first of all, as you said it, CTO, responsibility itself is not clearly laid out. Sometimes CTOs end up becoming responsible for compliance and regulation, including release management, and so many components that, personally speaking, they should not be responsible for. So it starts with clarity. But answering your question, right? Um, an example that I can share with you was, um, I was responsible for a big rollout of ERP that we were building. And we've learned, of course, that we need to all of a sudden be PCI compliant. Well, you know, speed versus safety right there. So it was a very interesting exercise to go through to really understand what it means to be PCI compliant. Why does that matter? And how do we ensure that compliance? What's the scope? What's out of the scope? Um, and of course, CTO becomes responsible. But personally thinking, the CISO, security teams, legal teams, it's a collaborative effort on really understanding what it means to be PCI compliant. But sometimes, again, it's thrown on CTOs to just, no, make us compliant. It's your responsibility now, and that's not fair.
So, what did leadership think the control was, and what was actually controlling the outcomes?
I think, of course, when compliance kicks in, there is a little bit of a panic that sets in. And the outcome typically is, hey, we need to be compliant, but we also need to move quickly, and with speed, as you rightly said. That typically becomes the controlling pain, and then it goes to, okay, who's responsible for getting this out, and let's see if we can make that person responsible for both compliance as well as the speed. I think you said this before. I remember you talking about this. It's a systems design. It's a decision framework. It's not one person trying to accomplish everything. Do we have a legal framework and its compliance understanding framework? Who needs to be in that decision framework to say this is what we need to do to be compliant, and this is why we need to be compliant? Do we really understand the scope and say this is what it takes to be compliant, and then say, all right, if for us to get there effectively, this is the path to go down? And typical tendency will be to skip all of these steps and go straight to, hey, make this happen in whatever time frame that we're trying to make this happen. And the result is actually expensive. I've lived this time and again, and once you push through that, result is typically often consequential, expensive, because you're now dealing with something in production, and everything is expensive once you get to that point, as opposed to doing it the right way. Doing it the right way, people, I know, skip that, but that's what's going to cost you time and money, in a big way.
Yeah, when my very first CTO job, I worked for some very non-technical leaders, and the CEO is very forward thinking, but he knew nothing about technology, and they kind of pushed me down a road where I became the roadblock. I was the one who was constantly having to make the decisions, and so I quickly learned that that wasn't going to work for both me personally and for the business. So we often hear, enterprises, they think that they're ready for AI, but they're actually not. Why is that gap dangerous?
It's dangerous because AI does two things. It amplifies your good if done right. It amplifies your bad if done wrong. It's that simple. So if it's not done right, and the consequence could be disastrous, and without understanding the risk associated with deploying AI without proper framework and readiness, you run those risks. That's why it's super dangerous to just jump into it and do it, and then think about, oh, what do I need to do to make sure that we have the right guardrails. That, I'm telling you, I mean, we've seen that time and again. That's not good.
So if you had to name one missing capability, data governance, security posture, or accountability, which one usually breaks first?
Oh, in my opinion, accountability breaks first because it's not clearly laid out. That's why it breaks first. You know, it there are right now, as I always say, technology is not the bottleneck. It's the clarity, it's the people, it's the culture, it's the mindset. And accountability breaks just because, again, there's no clarity on accountability typically.
Yeah, that's definitely, I 100% agree with that. And when leaders don't trust the controls, they compensate with manual approvals. Hey, you got to bring that to me. and that creates the illusion of safety and quietly building, dependencies. So like I became the dependency in the company that I was working for because the non-technical people kind of pushed me in that direction. But like AI, it often turns CEOs, CTOs, and CISOs into approval layers all over again. So in your view, what conditions cause AI decisions to concentrate at the top?
So there is this framework. I was listening to a podcast recently, and someone said there, "Hey, CEOs need to really drive the AI transformation. That's how it's that important." And I completely disagree. I think it's okay to have the vision. It's okay to really understand why we're doing this. I think executive leadership is about, in my opinion, really dig deeper to understand why, and why do we need to adopt AI? How does it help us? How does it help customers? Um, and that's hard because then you start, really picking and unpacking a slew of problems that you have to deal with. But you said that, right? Preparedness is a big word. Part of preparedness is asking the right questions. Then you go into, okay, who can do this, and how do we do this so that the executive leadership doesn't become the bottleneck? Because typical executive leaderships, like for example, CEO, right? As a CEO, I use AI every day, and I think it's the greatest thing because at my level, I'm looking at the strategy, I'm looking at the vision, I'm looking at the reporting, and AI does those things so well, right? But when it comes to, let's say, my team, who's working in the data layer somewhere, and he's thinking, or he or she thinking, okay, this is not working, this is not right, the tool is not, AI is not right, I can't really apply it just like that. This needs a lot more thinking, there's a lot more nuances to this, I need to apply governance, I need to integrate this with 5 systems, this won't work, in a silo or more. And I'm thinking, hey, no, we got to just do it, and we got to create all these agents, we got to go and we got to make this more efficient. And there's a huge gap between the what it takes to actually operationalize AI and what CEOs think AI could do. There's a huge gap there, and that's what we need to understand as leaders. Is no, when I use AI, that's not the same AI that's going to go into a manufacturing plant or into healthcare systems. It's much more nuanced, much more complicated, very difficult to govern, very difficult to secure, and if you don't do it right, the risks are going to be catastrophic.
Yeah, it's like you see, like if you delve into like just look at like chat gpt, if you delve into like creating a custom gpt, it itself will tell you, give me one job in this custom gpt. If you were, let's say you were trying to take a transcript and have it cut it up into um, shorter videos, it doesn't want to do like the analysis and the cutting all in one swoop. It wants to have one custom GPT that does the analysis and another one that does the cutting up. So even itself, it understands that there's limitations to what it can do and in what order it should do things. But like, what's the operational cost though when every decision needs some kind of sign off?
Oh, huge. If every decision needs sign off, then you're really not operating. You're not building a team. You're not building resilience. You're amplifying your risks. I think if you spend time on a decision framework, a control framework, an escalation framework, and proper KPIs, and I'm also a big fan of not measuring too many things, and not getting into the analysis paralysis mode, but look at what matters, and have a framework on when to escalate, why to escalate, and also, um, you know it's okay to give us that safety net saying we will fail. Okay, now don't fail twice, fail smartly. Be smart about where you fail, and learn. More importantly, how are we tracking our learning, how are we adapting our learning, and that's super important. If we can create that space, I think you will start seeing, you've done this. You said, as a CTO, you went from working 100 over 100 hours to 40 hours by putting a systems design thinking and operationalizing the execution of that, right? That's such an interesting concept. If we apply that, it'll start working. It might take time, but it'll start working.
Yeah, processes are important even when it comes to how you lead a department. But what I've done, you talked about failing, and you've said that AI can fail quietly before it fails loudly. So what does quiet failure look like in practice inside of an enterprise?
Oh, well, AI amplifies your data risks. Um, First of all, you have to understand what your data risks are. AI definitely amplifies your data risks, and AI on its own brings its own risks. And my point there was AI amplifies your bad and ugly parts. And when something does happen, an incident happens, it's going to be disastrous. Okay. Um, One of the things that we've learned very early on is many people were jumping and using AI systems without really protecting the data, without having any kind of governance, without having a proper classification and labeling. And the result was bad because it was exposing data left, right, and center. People who didn't have access to the data were able to see some sensitive information, and it was leading to all kinds of legal issues. And of course, then you have your shadow IT issues, and I can go on. But AI definitely amplifies your risks.
So what gets rationalized as normal implementation friction, but it's actually systemic risk?
Um, Again, everybody thinks that typically they not going through and understanding where your risks are. For example, when we take any of our customers on AI journey, we start by asking simple questions on they to understand their preparedness, their maturity in terms of thinking. Okay. Then once we feel like they're okay, or we get them to a point where they understand why they need to do this, and they have a framework to start executing it. The typical rationalization of uh, things that don't work is again jumping in and doing it quickly and not really putting the thought into protecting their data, having the right data quality and data assurance, because AI is only as good as in the context and the data that you provide. Even outside of data, the word that I use, context, right? Most companies don't understand that AI needs the context. The better context, the better AI is going to work. Most companies don't understand the risk that AI themselves are going to bring to the table, whether it's hallucinations, whether it is bias, whether it is any other risk that I can go on and quote four or five more easily. And you said it right. You gave an example saying, "Hey, if I build a custom chat GPT, it's want me to do one thing and it does a good job if I tell them." That's the context. You're setting the context, you're training it, and you're specifying it and saying, "Okay, this is you do this for me, and this is your context," and it does a great job. And typically they don't do that, and therefore what happens is it's a mediocre AI, and you're building your technical slop along the way, and you're going to have to deal with this technical debt and technical slop if you don't do it the right way, because it's going to come and hit you later.
So I want to talk about the inflection point, like when you realize that the old operating model can't it can't scale, and more approvals isn't a strategy, right? So like you mentioned the custom GPTs, and I did as well. And one thing I think people need to learn about those things is that, hey, try looking at the instructions of one of those and seeing how detailed the prompt is for that. And I think pretty quickly people realize that they're not using ChatGPT the way it should be used. So like, I don't think that human in the loop is necessarily inherently wrong, but when it becomes the default, it usually means the organization never built some kind of trustable decision rails. So the leader becomes that rail. So what's the moment when leaders realize move fast and fix later doesn't work for AI in regulated or critical environments?
Oh, it definitely does not. You cannot move fast with AI and fix later because, as I said, the risk of a consequence within an AI system or AI enabled system is far greater, than the traditional system and legacy systems. Okay, so you can definitely can do that and can't risk it. I'll give you an example, Mike. So recently, we're of course, we're building lots of AI agents, and platforms that are enabled by AI agents. And everything that we build, it goes through very rigorous security testing. Okay, so we work with security teams and say, hey, I'm building this set of agents. Can you please test them? Okay, and there's a process that we were going through to get that testing done of the platform we're building, and then realized that, okay, so we can't keep doing this every time we change the platform and have the same level of effort in security testing. So what we did was we said, okay, let's think agentically, let's think differently. Let's really understand everything that goes into security testing and create an AI agent for that. Okay, and we did, and we applied that to the platform. But then once the AI agent does all the security testing, that report would go to the security, someone in security team. Someone is still saying, looking at it and going, okay, this looks good, or no, I want more information on this one, whatever it is that they're doing, and they're going and saying like yes or no. And we instantly reduce the time from it taking some security testing taking weeks to day. and
So,
that's a, and that's the one example of how you can eliminate. Okay, I need a continuous approval touch points. Everything has to go through someone to things need to go to someone when they matter. And AI can we can build AI intelligently up to that point, and the human in the loop, as you rightly said, should matter. If everything goes through human in loop, then it's not an AI system, it's just still in a traditional system, legacy system. That's what it was.
so what part of the organization typically tries to patch it with process instead of fixing the system?
Oh, it's interesting. I've observed two big themes in the last few years. Typically, the security and IT conversations were siloed, afterthought. What's interesting is businesses want to adopt AI, and therefore they want to go aggressive. They want to start using AI, and so either they're doing it now, because they feel like, okay, I'm gonna be able to do more with less, or whatever is the agenda, and not really bring in the security into the mix. Okay, so that's one thing I've seen is businesses wanting to embrace AI but ignoring or sidestepping governance and security. Okay, um, that's time and again, is where they fall into the trap.
So, what happens when leaders don't trust their AI controls? Like, what predictable patterns show up in the organization, and how do those patterns create bottlenecks?
Yeah, and the when AI isn't done right, what you'll notice typically is that things actually take longer than they used to before. You'll see, a lot more. You will see the chatter, you'll see the signals, and you'll see lots of noise about something went wrong because of AI. You lose the accountability. It's the end of the day, when you start hearing that, hey, this AI system made me do it, or it did this, and therefore it happened, right? You lost control. You as a company have completely lost control when you hear something like that. We have to realize that end of the day, humans, or we still need to be accountable. At my level, I have to be accountable for my shareholders, investors. I can't simply say, well, AI did this and therefore there was a breach and therefore we're screwed, right? Try doing that. So that's one thing that you'll see very quickly is that the noise. You have to pay attention to those that noise too sometimes, and it's not going the right way.
So, what does it do culturally when engineers learn that the fastest path is escalation?
Oh, it destroys creativity. It destroys culture too. That just means you don't have the right culture. Is what I would say. is if that becomes your, if I messed up, there's a bug, and if, the fastest way for me to deal with that is escalate. I think you have a wrong culture there. I think the culture that I would love to see is that, hey, this happened, I'm going to fix it. I know what's going on. And and as long as they know at what point should they escalate, right? At what impact point that they should escalate, and they should feel comfortable to say, hey, I'm going to escalate this. This is okay. And I know why. The escalation is not for somebody to ding me. Escalation point is for someone now to deal with something that's above me. I can't deal with this because of the impact. I need someone else to help me deal with this. And if they feel safe with that escalation is not that someone is going to go come bring me, but someone is going to help me deal with this, then they'll feel a lot more comfortable to escalate. And that's the kind of culture we have to build as leaders.
Yeah, I've personally watched teams become experts at escalation instead of ownership. So, because escalation is rewarded, right, with speed, while accountability sometimes is punished with risk. So, right now, you're responsible for scaling AI security and compliance simultaneously. What did you have to stop doing as a leader to avoid becoming that throughput constraint?
I have to stop as you rightly said, I have to stop the escalations or discussions. um, I have to start looking at, do we have a framework? I had to sit down and go through, and we're still going through, by the way, because AI is changing so many things. So we're having to change the culture accordingly. Because in the last six months back or 6 months before, agentic AI was still new. Now with agentic AI, we're having to rethink our entire decision framework and say, "Hey, well, what do we do now?" Right? AI is breaking the business model. So our job as leaders is to really put a framework that will allow everyone, the teams, to be nimble and adapt. But we need to figure out why we're doing this, have a clear goals, and it's okay to change goal spot because, as I said, AI is changing rapidly. We just need to understand this is what's going to happen. But what are the must-haves? Just what is the no list, and when to escalate, and why to escalate, and who to escalate it to, and that drives efficiency a lot more, quite frankly.
So, what did you centralize more intentionally, and what did you decentralize with guardrails?
Wow, that's such an excellent question. So we uh, tried our best to centralize the architecture, the framework, systems thinking, in fact, culture too, and decentralize the execution.
Makes sense. So, what did you personally keep ownership of, even as you delegated execution?
Outcome checkpoints of outcomes, or if the escalation that comes to me, and for me to hear the head, okay, how can I support the team? Not so much, you know, who can I blame this on, or who to ding, or what is the next step here that we need to go, and then go back and say, hey, this is what we learned here. Let's make sure that this is a true learning and we don't repeat that.
So, ProArch scaled through growth and acquisitions. When delivery models change quickly, governance can fracture. So, what governance assumptions break during rapid scaling?
Oh, well, when you scale rapidly, organically and inorganically, the different systems, different thinking, different processes, different cultures, if you don't try to assimilate them, don't take the time to bring them together, and intentional decisions, and even if you say, no, we're going to keep them as disparate systems, this is why having that alignment is where things break. Now, really getting into the deeper of the mechanics of why they need to be different, why they need to assimilate, where they need to assimilate, where it makes sense. There's so much work that needs to go there. But if done right, I mean, teams will thrive. Teams will actually, teams. Most of the teams want to assimilate. Right? Why are you acquiring some, a company, so that you can say 1 + 1 is equal to 3 at least, right?
What's one governance decision that you'd redo earlier if you could?
Um, be clear in terms of everyone's role, accountability, and responsibility. Clarity. I would have spent more time, in bringing that clarity in. Because we're a small company, still growing. Not an excuse, but sometimes you need to change roles very quickly. But spending a little bit more time on what success means for every role, I think I would have done that differently.
So, up to now, we've described the failure modes and the leadership cost. Let's make it transferable. How do you design governance that increases speed instead of creating drag without turning it into a compliance theater?
Um, well, the example that I gave you earlier, fits right in. I think, as you rightly said, if the leaders in the organization are aligned on the core objectives and goals that they have for themselves, for their teams, and for the customers, and you build autonomous systems as opposed to approval loops. Process is good, but process cannot be bottleneck. Build systems that are self-learning, build a culture that's self-learning, but aligned on the objectives, aligned on the speed. Everybody, a lot of times people don't understand the risks that they share. Align on the risks, have a risk list, and more importantly, also have a no list. And that really helps teams going.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately the goal isn't more governance, right? It's fewer ambiguous decisions, clear ownership and observable controls. They tend to reduce the number of times that you as the leader have to be the risk processor, right? I mean, you got to teach other people to do these things. So you've argued that governance can be an accelerator. What does good enough AI governance look like in practice, specifically enough that a CTO could implement it without being the ocean?
Oh, I mean, that's what we do day in, day out. I'll give you an example of ourselves. And we're our customer zero, so we eat our own dog food. We start with understanding our data maturity. Before that, I mean, I can get into AI preparedness and the AI training so that we know our teams at least are at a stage that they need to be from the training perspective, that they can start using AI. But let's say we've gone through that. It's really then understanding about your data estate, where it is, the maturity, the ownership, and the quality. And you need to have a really good governance in place. Again, there are great tools now, and it's not that complicated once you have clarity there. Okay? Then you have your own, AI risks that you need to address. But more importantly, as you start building AI agents or AI applications, make sure that you have a some type of a steering committee, not to slow you down, but collaborative steering committee that is able to not oversee and not to approve, but to really observe and then start making modifications. But having that architecture, having that, the security architecture, data architecture, infra architecture, cloud architecture to support your AI adoption is a step one, and that's where you spend a lot of time in governance first.
So, what should be measured continuously so that trust doesn't rely on periodic reviews?
Um, we, of course, everything that happens in the AI world, you have to continuously monitor and check for data uh, security issues. And we continuously look, and we have, because we also have a cybersecurity expertise and we have cybersecurity teams. We monitor AI agent as if it's a human being. Okay. And we have an identity, so this is where this is a continuous process. All of our checkpoints that we establish through data, through security and through governance. They're continuous processes. But unlike before, they are not going through approvals. They're not going through. They're automatically, seamlessly happening. And the governance you need is coming and checking as humans to say, hey, is everything going the way it's supposed to? Let me look at why and what's really happening, and then saying, okay, this is going the way it's supposed to. No, it's not. We're not. We're missing a whole bunch. We missed this completely the entire data set, and we haven't classified or labeled that. Well, it's coming up. So that's what your governance will need to do.
So where do companies over-engineer compliance, and where do they dangerously underinvest, and how should a CTO decide the difference?
That's a great question, Mike. I personally believe that compliance is the result of really good security hygiene. That's how it should be. If you follow good security practices, you are, most of the time compliant. Then it is really about checking the check boxes for specific compliance. Okay. People typically don't take that approach of saying we're going to take the security as a foundation and have the good practice, and then we will measure the compliance continuously. They go from, okay, we need to make compliance a thing, and come from compliance angle and see what needs to be done. And that's when, in my opinion, things will start going wrong. It will be too expensive to once you're trying to only do it because you're compliant, you're missing the boat. They have to think beyond compliance. Sometimes compliance don't really cover you from security perspective. Don't think just because you're compliant for a regulation, you are covered from security perspective and risk perspective. No. Often we found that no, just because you're compliant on a regulation doesn't mean that you're secure.
Yeah, you mentioned check boxes, and I know what you mean by that. But what's the simplest decision rule that you use to avoid checkbox governance?
Um, we start most of our engagements is we start with the security best practices and go f- go from there to say, okay, even if it is for our clients, or even if it is for ourselves, we look at it from that perspective: zero trust, security as a core foundation, and then see where are the gaps between their security foundation, the compliance, and how does it not become a checkbox exercise? Well, it becomes checkbox because every compliance document is a checkbox end of the day. But it doesn't feel like it's a checkbox exercise. It's more like okay, you are doing a review, and the thorough validation. That's what it looks like. Now, of course, we're leveraging AI agents to do that too. So that's a totally different story, because the potential of how AI can really help in compliance management, and it really can, because now there are tools that can automatically look at your entire security controls, security risks, and say this is where you are not compliant and this is where you're compliant. So there's definitely a way to turn this into a better process, than when manually going through a checkbox exercise.
So, what's one area that you personally won't compromise on, even if the business pushes for speed?
Um, for us, it's honestly speaking, it's our integrity, meaning, let's say, our ability to take a security risk. We will not compromise on short cutting security practices just because, hey, we have someone who is willing to pay. Let's say if someone comes and says, deliver something today, forget about security, we won't do it.
That's very interesting, because I mean, security is something that, like, when I was a CTO, it was a constant issue that I had to teach even the other executives. Like, I can tell you a story. This is not related to AI, but like, I had one of the owners have all our financial information on a laptop, and he's going to Mexico with this thing. And I said to him, Make sure that thing is with you at all, and if you're in the hotel, lock it in a safe or something. And of course, what happens? He goes to Mexico, he takes a cab from the airport to the hotel, gets out,
Mm-hmm.
leaves the laptop bag, in the
Mm-hmm.
back seat of the cab, losing everything. And then I said to him, well, hey, at least it's password protected. Guess what? He didn't have it password protected. So like it kind of leads me to, like, when governance is vague, right? And that was my fault. I should have made sure that he had a password on there. So when governance is vague, leaders compensate, with heroics, right? And when
Mm-hmm.
governance is explicit, teams can move without asking permission every single time. I mean, it just makes sense. You have the rules. So if a
Mm-hmm.
CTO wants to decentralize AI decisions safely, what decision rights should be defined first?
In fact, we've done this. So what we've done and what we're doing now is actively, and architecture is needs to be set. You have your data controls, then you have your governance framework set. At that point, our goal is to give all of our employees the ability to create their own agents, because we took care of security and governance behind the scenes, and we are giving them a tool that they can feel safe about doing that. We are investing, when, of course, not all of our employees can go create agents, because only so many of them can use Copilot Studio. In some cases, we have to go to Azure Foundry and use advanced tools to create agents that span across workflows, multiple data systems. But again, at that point, it's about execution, because they don't need to worry about the rest. They've taken care of everything else. You've taken care of everything else. So if you have that right framework, right process, and now the beauty is AI allows you to automate a lot of things. AI allows you to periodically check, your agents, what you're building. So right there, it gives you a lot more you can do much faster. Before, most of this has to be manual effort. So now it can be automated.
So, what should senior leaders stop delegating blindly in AI adoption? Because the leadership debt compounds if they don't own it.
Um, so I think what we have to do is balance between the delegation versus accountability. What do I mean by that? If I tell my team, "Hey, I want you to go build the agent to do something," okay, that's fine. But at my level, if I don't spend time thinking about, okay, did I provide the right framework, governance? Did I provide the right tools for them to go do this? And what is the we need to do to get to that point first? And how do we prepare ourselves for that? And that's where I believe, we as a leaders will have to spend more time. It's easy to say increase the adoption, by to reduce the operational or increase the operational efficiency by 25%. I want everybody to be productive that much more. But if I don't really spend some time to understand how am I going to support that decision, what do I need to support that decision, then all I've done is just set ourselves up for failure.
So, what would be the first conversation that you'd force inside the executive team to clarify ownership?
Oh, the first conversation is, and we're going through one right now, because we're embarking on this journey of creating functional agents and technical agents, not only for ourselves, but also for our customers. Uh, the first step for us is to understand why this is important, um, at every step of the way, and then understand how we're going to accomplish this, and who's involved and at what level, and who is accountable at the executive level to get what done. It's a collaborative effort. In this world, there is not, unlike before, you can't just go one person and say, okay, you're responsible, CTO, you own it all. That's not going to work in the AI world. It simply won't.
So, Santosh, we've talked about the technical realities. And the real theme here is leadership responsibility under uncertainty, right? And so I want to close with a question that puts the burden where it belongs on what a leader chooses to own. So if a CTO does nothing different in the next 12 months, what's the quiet risk they're underestimating, and why will it surface too late to manage cleanly?
CTOs play such a crucial role. And if you don't do anything for the next 1 year, you are running the risk of becoming irrelevant, and you are making the organization irrelevant. I'll tell you why. Um, the transformation of AI is not just at the productivity level or agentic level. AI is changing the business models. AI is redefining the value. I'll give you one example. Right? The I think Morgan Stanley SaaS index fell by 20%. Salesforce, companies like Salesforce, ServiceNow, they're experiencing double-digit drops. Why is that? Of course, they'll find a way to innovate. I believe that they'll come out of this okay somehow and innovate. But right now, what they're experiencing is everyone taking a step back and saying, "Why am I paying so much for your IP, whereas I can ask my AI to give me that IP?" So I could really look at the value from software IP perspective, and it's transferring to a utility value. Like I'm going to pay for compute and ask my AI, to do this for me, right? And that's changing the dynamic. So my point here is the value is being redefined, and in this world, if as a CTO you don't recognize that and change things to adopt, then you're putting yourselves, your teams, and your organization at risk. So, and because of the speed and the scale at which things are happening.
Yeah. So I really enjoyed this conversation. It's been great talking to you. Could you let the listeners know how they can connect with you if they'd like to find out more?
Yeah, our website would be the best place to go, prog.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, Santosh Kaveti. You'll find me there. I'm relatively active on LinkedIn.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for staying in the operational reality instead of theory. The core lesson here is really simple, guys. AI doesn't just introduce model risk, it introduces leadership bottlenecks when governance and decision rights aren't designed to scale. Scaling's always something that's so important. Now, if you're a senior technical leader and everything still seems to come back to you, decisions, delivery escalation, we built a quick diagnostic tool called the Firefighter CTO Quiz, and it'll show you exactly where dependency is forming in your team and how to fix it. You can find it at the link in the description. And thanks a lot for being here. We hope to see you back here again next Friday for another episode of Gaining the Technology Leadership Edge.